Coming up, just a few weeks ago, Kevin Durant sent a direct trade request to the Brooklyn Nets owner Joe Tsai. Now it's rumored they will sit down for a meeting to discuss that demand and potentially, possibly, could it be getting away from this idea of blowing up what the Nets hoped would be a championship contending roster? Next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, Brooklyn, yo. Yes, it's the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. We thank you for making us your first listen on all those platforms, free for you, wherever you get them. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. And Doug is not here for this one, but we, of course, will continue to break down all the latest news from the Brooklyn Nets landscape. We did just yesterday talk about what we thought, each of us, Doug and I, would be the ultimate outcome for Kevin Durant and the trade demand. We want to just put our final foot forward on what we thought would happen. And then obviously, as news continues to break around this, we said we'd bring it to you and try to dissect if it can be something concrete going forward. This may or may not be exactly that. Doug had said he thought that ultimately Kevin Durant would stay, and maybe the latest rumor suggests that that's more likely than not. I think that you can still go into this season and see a potential trade, even though it may linger all the way up to the deadline. Now we have coming out here as we talk about an article from Steve Bulpett for Heavy.com, where it is now rumored that sometime this week, this will be Thursday, so only a couple days away, maybe you want to include the weekend in it as well, that Kevin Durant is supposedly going to sit down with owner Joe Tsai. He is who he sent the direct trade request to a few weeks ago, and potentially, you would think, discuss the trade request that he made. And I think I listed as demand maybe at the top of the show there. Trade request, demand. You can parse words about whether or not that has more of a sense of urgency to it or more of a sense of legitimacy, of finality, a trade request versus a trade demand, right? But according to this article, they are going to sit down. This has been picked up by the New York Post. Brian Lewis echoed some sentiments that he had speculated around when these conversations could be coming potentially. But Bullpit basically lays out a scenario talking with a couple of executives, a couple of sources close to the situation. As we always know, you usually don't get the names placed to these quotes, but that maybe, as we've discussed a lot, both sides are starting to look at this situation a little bit differently after the trade market didn't develop the way either side had hoped. If you're Kevin Durant and you're looking to go to Phoenix, well, that didn't necessarily develop the way you hoped it would. If you're the Brooklyn Nets, just the landscape in general of having a number of suitors come to the table. It initially had been said, yeah, every single team made a call about Kevin Durant. But as we know, Sean Marks and the Brooklyn Nets set a very high benchmark for what it was going to take to get Kevin Durant off of the Brooklyn Nets. Is that ultimately that this is coming to the point of what Sean Marks and the Nets' goal was all along? Set such a high demand that no one's going to be able to meet it. And you can go back to, as we've said, to Kevin Durant and say, we put it out there. We looked at the market. We looked at the offers, but you know how good you are. How could we possibly take anything less than maximum value in order to get you off of this team and maybe to a destination of your choosing? So all these things seem to have been trending in that direction. And one of the first quotes, just to put them into context here, is what I'm hearing is that Kevin Durant is going to meet with the owner this week. The source told Pulpit of Heavy Sports. He's going to go directly to the owner, Joe Tsai, sometime this week. We'll see how that works. Now, the interesting thing, there's a couple of interesting things about how that works inside a lot of these quotes, because it goes on to say whether or not this is going to lead to a resolution around what the issues were for Kevin Durant with the team, or if it's going to lead to a resolution with ultimately Kevin Durant still wanting to be traded. I don't know, said the exec. I have no idea what's going to come from the meeting. There are some things that Durant is unhappy about, and I'm not sure any of that gets fixed here, but maybe it does. And we'll focus on that part of it first here. If we're talking about going into this meeting and where expectations would be for Kevin Durant and what he can get clarity on or start to feel more comfortable about. If it's about the extension for Kyrie Irving, I don't know if you're going to get movement on that, right? Did the trade request come because ultimately I wanted Kyrie Irving to get his max extension? Those negotiations broke down. I feel like that was not the right way for it to be handled, and I want out. You can say, as we've heard Kyrie Irving come out publicly and say his every intention of playing for the Brooklyn Nets this season and beyond, or at least Shams Charania reported that that's the sentiments from Kyrie Irving and his camp, that you can go back to the table and you can finish those negotiations in a way that makes sense. But if the Nets have established where they are on it, you're not going to get movement on that aspect of it from Kevin Durant's standpoint. The other piece would be, are you unhappy with Harrington being let go? Are you unhappy with the direction of the coaching staff? Are you unhappy with the way the roster was constructed last year? These types of issues, can they be addressed in so much as Joe Tsai could say, I understand why you're frustrated. We were frustrated as well, right? We didn't love some of the moves and how they played themselves out. There's a difference between acknowledging areas where you think things did not go as well as they could have and saying, yes, they didn't go as well as they could have, and we'll do what you would prefer us to do in this situation. And I'm not saying that Kevin Durant has ever made those types of demands of an organization. We've gone back before and talked about how, in general, and Kevin Durant has been quoted as saying, "That's not my job. That's not my role." Right, being an executive or being the GM, I respect them and what they have to do and what their jobs are, and my job is to go out there and perform at a high level and help win championships ultimately. So, an airing of grievances as maybe being the top level here, and Kevin Durant maybe coming in and saying, man, was I frustrated. That's why I put in the trade request for a myriad of reasons. Now, having been incommunicado with the organization for the past several weeks, I let the steam kind of, cool down a little bit. And I think that there's a way for us to go forward here. That could be an element of it, and that can be combined with understanding what has not been able to be accomplished on the trade market. That being said, I think that there is the other side to this where if you think that these two parties are at an impasse, this can just be about, for two sides that have not communicated since the request, resetting the table on where they are, what's going to work for both parties, and how they move forward from it. We'll get into a couple more quotes here, really from a couple of executives, couple of sources that are referenced in the heavy article, and try to put a little bit more context into it and understanding again what maybe could be Kevin Durant's way to move forward from this and why maybe this meeting can benefit the Brooklyn Nets as well. First, though, got to tell you about our friends over at Bet Online, because if you were to go over to Bet Online right now, you would see that NBA championship odds. Well, the Boston Celtics are still up there at plus 400. So we talk about how things move on the line of rumor and speculation. Boston still sits atop the list there, but the Brooklyn Nets are there plus 1400. So in theory, if you believe that this is leading to the resolution, that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and Ben Simmons are going to be on the court, go ahead and put some money on it. That's good. That's plus 1400. You're getting free money. Go over there and look at where Kevin Durant is in the MVP voting as well. Obviously, Bet Online is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find your favorite sports and events on the number one online betting source for odds, lines, and of course games. You get over to Bet Online, where they continue to be the top resource for all the wagering information. They're going to have you podcast sources. They're going to have betting sources. They got you covered, soup to nuts, NBA, NFL, just around the corner. You know you're going to want to check them out for all the championship lines for the big game in February, as well as maybe local teams. The Giants, the Jets, you can get some money on them. I'm not saying it's going to be good money, not saying it's going to be smart money, but you could do it if you want. And if you get over there on Bet Online, you know that they're going to have you covered on your mobile device or on your laptop. Learn more about all the action that's happening today. Bet Online, it's where the game starts. And where we start to continue to have the conversation around this article and really around the meeting. The article itself, it offers some context. It gives you at least some sense of where this could go. But realistically, what we're looking at is what is going to be the potential outcome for this. Is there a world where this meeting on the heels of we'll hear the Nets are moving forward into the regular season? Kevin Durant is retracting his trade request. That's really the only thing to come out of this potentially that is going to calm this storm around Kevin Durant and the Nets. Saying that they had a meeting and it was productive and both sides feel good about where they are. Okay. It's only going to lead to more speculation. And in that sense, the other side, as I was saying there at the top, the other side of coming out of this meeting could be, yes, I was frustrated. I wanted to see some things changed. Where do we stand on that? From Joe Tsai's standpoint, and I'll say from Sean Mark's standpoint as well, we know the other element about this entire offseason has been what went well, what didn't go well over the last 3 years, and not about who's to blame, but just about what decisions were made and how do all parties feel coming out of it. So if Kevin Durant looks at it and says, this organization is a disaster, well, a meeting like this isn't going to change anything. Shy of saying, I want you to fire the head coach, fire the GM, I want this player, that player, whatever it may be. Making a list of demands and having Joe Tsai say, okay, we're going to meet every one of those, if that were the case. On the flip side of it, I do think that coming out of this, the Brooklyn Nets and Sean Marks and Joe Tsai have kind of taken that step back and said, the last few years have not gone the way that we've wanted. Maybe we feel like we over acquiesced to the superstars in a couple of areas, and we would just like to reset the table. This is what we are looking to do organizationally going forward, and this is what we're looking to do in this iteration with this superstar talent. That can still mean coming back and saying, we believe, right, wrong, or indifferent, we believe in Steve Nash as the head coach. We believe in Sean Marks as the GM. So if Joe Tsai is setting the standard of the GM isn't going anywhere, the head coach isn't going anywhere, and ideally, you, the superstars, aren't going anywhere either, and we're going to continue to try to make this work. Everything that's gone over the last 3 years has been difficult. There have been missteps from roster construction. There have been missteps in terms of things you can't control, like pandemics and like vaccinations, and not only injuries, right? Kevin Durant injuries, having injuries to some even the role players along the way have really hurt them. And then the evolution of some of the role players. One year you think that the Blake Griffin signing is an absolute home run hit and a steal. The following season, it looks like he's no longer going to be viable in the rotation for the team. Signing Patty Mills seems like a steal that the NBA universally agreed on, but in the grand scheme of things, was he going to be a productive contributor when it came to meaningful NBA playoff basketball? So there's all these little hairs that you're trying to split there, let alone LaMarcus Aldridge and everything else, right? So you can go down that laundry list. There's plenty of decisions that were not the best from a GM standpoint, from an organizational standpoint, but that does happen, right? It's really just a matter of, is that going to get used as everything wasn't executed perfectly and that's my reason for wanting to exit, or everything went the way that it did and it's just time for me to move on? That's the thing that I think that the default logical perspective on this meeting would be, they're going to come back, they're going to even it out, they're going to move forward as currently constituted. But the other side of it would be Kevin Durant saying, I'm open to other teams beyond the ones that I had listed, right? I said I wanted to go to Phoenix. I said I wanted to go to Miami. Now you heard about the rumor about Boston, which we'll get to here in a second. But you can send me anywhere you want, right? The Brooklyn Nets are setting a very, very high benchmark about what they want to get in return for a trade. Is Kevin Durant going in and saying, listen, I get it. You want to maximize the value, but ultimately, I don't plan on playing for the Brooklyn Nets. That component of it, saying his mentality and his mindset, he's always going to come in. He's going to want to play. He's going to want to be out there on the court if ultimately a trade doesn't get done. He can be confirming that right now if he goes into a meeting. He could be confirming that he's not going to, that he's officially done with the Brooklyn Nets, and that would behoove Brooklyn to make a move sooner than later and maybe accept 70 cents on the dollar or whatever the case may be. All indications would be, from what Kevin Durant has been as a player over his career, that I would think he's going, maybe this is going to the meeting and saying, I was frustrated, but what can we do to move forward with this? Are there some little adjustments we can make? Can we clear the air a little and go into the season with Kyrie Irving, with me, with Ben Simmons, thinking that we can put this thing back together? And if this year goes closer to plan than the past few have, Kyrie Irving will get his big extension maybe at the end of the year or maybe even sooner. And we'll be right back on track. Ben Simmons on the same contract timeline, put Kyrie Irving on the same contract timeline. And now you see the opportunity that you have going forward over the next couple of seasons. I I hesitate to make a concrete statement about it, about how I feel about it, because we know how in the wind this is, and because this is a rumored meeting. So, and I don't mean that where there isn't, the rumor, there's probably something to it. But what if the meeting never takes place? Then we're no closer to thinking that the two sides are at least willing to have these discussions. Other things that were mentioned inside of the article on heavysports.com. I think there are some teams, and we're going to get into this a little bit deeper here, as far as what has led to. Coming up in a second, what has led to maybe the impetus for Joe Tsai to want to take this meeting with Kevin Durant as well. There's no reason why he should say, "Nope, you requested a trade. We're done. See you later." But there are some elements to this that I think talk about the NBA from a high level and the way that things have gone on, and specifically when it comes to the Boston Celtics trade, about whether or not that has led to issues for the Nets organization in trying to move Kevin Durant, which has also caused them to need to take a step back from whatever their process was. Kevin Durant requests the trade. Where do we go from here? This is our plan. Try to execute. And now getting the feedback on that and saying maybe that isn't going to be our best path forward. So, coming up here in a second, break down some of the quotes from this article that discuss that potential trade package with Boston. All right. So I started to actually read this quote there a moment ago, but I think there are some teams that aren't very happy that when they talk to Boston, it gets in the papers, he said. This is a source speaking with heavy.com. That doesn't help. I've talked with a couple of teams that are not happy with the rumors that creep out of their throughout this. It's not a good way to do business. The one thing there, and then we're going to talk also about specifically the trade offer here that allegedly was there, the package from the Boston Celtics. Um, I don't know if I put too much into that, because every rumor gets out there when it comes to trade speculation connected to this team, connected to that team. And while other teams may not like the rumors getting out there or the trade packages potentially, because it can, if you're the Boston Celtics, damage your relationship with Jaylen Brown. Okay, that's fine, but also that comes from the player side and it comes from organizational sides. So there's a lot of moving parts involved when it comes to having those type of this discussions. The other thing that I thought was interesting, though, is when they talked about the package with the Boston Celtics, saying, I don't know if that was ever officially an offer. There was a recent report that the Nets also turned down an offer for Jaylen Brown, Derek White, and a first round pick from the Celtics, but others have disputed to the heavy that such a proposal was ever truly on the table. And this leads to, we were hearing conversations around the timeline of the trade request and over the last few weeks, that the idea that if the Brooklyn Nets were having a conversation, if Sean Marks is speaking with other GMs and just saying, well, if you were looking at a package for Kevin Durant, we want Jason Tatum. And Boston says, obviously, you're not getting Jason Tatum. The assumption is then, well, if not Jason Tatum, it's obviously going to be centered around Jaylen Brown. Now, assumption versus actually a concrete discussion around that package, at least by this article, there's some level of that never officially happened. We never put that package officially out there, and it was never officially rejected. Again, this falls into the category of, yeah, okay, now everyone's trying to cover their tail a little bit. There's probably some tampering, elements that you want to avoid in there as well. So some of that stuff I do throw a little bit by the wayside. Um, the part of it about other teams maybe being frustrated around it, yes and no. Again, I think this just comes down to, as we've said before, where the market's been, what the demand has been from the Nets as far as what they would want back in a package, and other teams for the most part just not flat out being able to meet it. Now, most importantly, inside of this, Speaking with the source, my bet is they don't trade either of them. Maybe Kyrie. I don't see them trading Durant because they're not going to get back what they should, and I wouldn't trade him either. The heck with it. I'm going to clean that up for YouTube purposes. He signed the deal. The heck with it, right? Now, again, when you're talking about bringing sources, and he does go on to say, I don't see I don't see KD being a hardline guy, as we talked about at the top. If they can't get a deal done, he's just going to say, "F it, the heck with it." He'll play, and he'll play hard because he always does. I know KD, and he's not going to sit out or anything like that. He's not that kind of guy. There's no way he's not going to do anything like that. If Brooklyn wants to be good now, the fastest way is that KD and Kyrie and Ben Simmons play together and are playing well. With anything else, you're pretty much scrambling this season and waiting for those draft picks to bring you something good down the line. No matter what you bring back in a trade now, but it's not going to be KD. So just to tie the bow on this, right? First of all, the first part of it being, if you want to be good, obviously, then that's the team. Yes, of course, right? Um, we said it all along. The best version of this is going into this season with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Ben Simmons, support cast, and seeing how good you can be potentially. That's the best version of it. And arguably, it may be the best version of things for Kevin Durant or for Kyrie Irving or for Ben Simmons, depending on where some of these trade packages were going to go. Um, we talked about Kevin Durant not being a hardline guy, not sitting out. Again, nothing is true until it becomes true. Kevin Durant wasn't a guy who would make a trade request until he requested a trade. But do we tend to agree that we think he's a guy that wouldn't sit out? Yes, that generally is the way that we fall on it. And the other part of it, though, too, I think, is when they talk about being good right now and waiting for those draft picks versus the trade, just on that element alone, I yes, that's also true. The best team that you're going to be able to have this season for the Brooklyn Nets is going to include Kevin Durant. It's a little bit of a no-brainer there. But if you are considering trading Kevin Durant, if you're in these discussions, it's as much about the future as it is about the present. We talked about the Brooklyn Nets wanting to be competitive. Doug has outlined how this upcoming season, at least in the short term, doesn't need to be a highly competitive with the way that the draft picks break down. But over the next 2, 3, and 4 years, you're going to want to put yourself in a position to still be able to be in the playoff picture in the Eastern Conference. That can be accomplished with Ben Simmons and Kyrie Irving and not Kevin Durant, but everyone knows how much you get elevated when you keep Kevin Durant on the team. My perspective at this point is, if a meeting were to go down, is that I think Kevin Durant can look out at the landscape and get a better sense of how willing teams were or were not or are going to be to come and get him for an exorbitant asking price. And if it doesn't look like your preferred destinations are either going to be capable of or willing to give up whatever it's going to take to satisfy Brooklyn, then you're back to square one with your options. And this would be the way Doug talked about it, as far as thinking that Kevin Durant and this team as constituted will go forward, at least for the upcoming season, right? And in the same way that we talked about pushing the pause button on Kyrie, he opts in. You can revisit this at the beginning of next off season and around the draft and around free agency, and make another determination on what you think is going to be best for the organization going forward. You can do that now for both sides with Kevin Durant. Let's wait. Let's see how this year goes. And if we're right back at the table, maybe things will look different on all sides. And whether it's Kyrie Irving, Ben Simmons, Kevin Durant, the values will be better, the sample size will be better, and teams may be more inclined to come back to the table, etc. All I can say is, if the speculation is that a meeting is going to take place here with Joe Tsai and Kevin Durant, that is the biggest piece of information in favor of him returning and things being a stand pat scenario. And I think it's also the best indication we've gotten in any form or fashion, rumor or otherwise, that the ultimate goal here from a Brooklyn Nets perspective is maybe being accomplished. And what I mean by that is, we talked about how the organization just feels like things got off the rails over these last few years. And again, said it throughout this episode, said it throughout the offseason. They've made mistakes. They've misallocated. resources. They wasted Javon Carter in the offseason, end up cutting him. He goes and joins the Milwaukee Bucks. You had to scramble to try to get a Dragic. No chance that he was going to come back to the team in the offseason. Number of players retiring. You go out and you make some moves, though, like giving up a first-round pick for Royce O'Neal, which, if this starts to trend back in a positive direction, starts to look like a better pickup. You have TJ Warren, et cetera. You have the young players coming on. But the Nets organizationally wanted to reset the expectation of the way that they're running the organization and how it's going to be to have superstars on their roster. It cannot be. And this goes back beyond any of the issues this past season specifically. And we talked about this with Kyrie Irving. The expectations of, you're going to need to be here, be playing, be available, barring injury. You need to be able to show up and be a part of what this team is doing going forward. Kevin Durant has never had issues with that component of it, but just the idea that the organization is moving forward and we want to move forward with all of our superstars and being successful. The decisions that we make in the short term around our superstars are going to be based on the superstars. But we're also going to make decisions that make sense for our organization in the long term. So whether or not that's keeping Steve Nash at the helm, agree or disagree how bad he has been, the sample sizes that he's given, whether it means that Sean Marks is not going anywhere as the GM, and that comes from Joe Tsai and his belief in him and what he wants to do going forward. In some ways, this can all end up feeling like everyone blowing off some steam, everybody coming back into the room, and everybody going, hey, we all feel better. All right, let's get back out there and let's try to get this thing done the way we intended when we first brought you in. That's winning a championship, that's playing at a high level, it's being competitive and trying to have deep playoff runs, something that we haven't seen yet, right? And that can be frustrating for an organization, but it can also be frustrating for the players, and it can lead to maybe a trade request that was not wholeheartedly desired by Kevin Durant, at least in the grand scheme, even if it was in that moment. We'll see what happens. I know that we just spent yesterday's episode giving our final predictions around what we think, and that's still what I believe. And Doug is, I think, is still going to tell you that he believes that Kevin Durant isn't going anywhere. I still think that Kevin Durant gets traded here up until we get concrete information around what came out of this meeting, what decisions get made going forward, right? So this doesn't confirm or deny anything in that regard. All we can do is continue to provide, more context to what's happening and what it potentially can mean for either side of it. So, no more Kevin Durant speculation, but a little more Kevin Durant information. Hopefully, we get some more news as the week goes on. Doug will be breaking that down for you coming up on Friday. And then next week, we'll dive right back in. And we will, as we've been saying, start to look at this roster and think about what are some of the additional moves that they can make regardless of superstar talent. What are some of the new things we want to see offensively, schematically, coaching, all of those things. So going to be plenty of other discussions that we can have here along the way. You get over to YouTube, you get into the comments. No, we do not hate Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, or Ben Simmons, as we appreciate you getting in the conversation. No, we don't want them to get traded. We're not trying to wish it into existence. It is just the reality of what this offseason has looked like. It's been tumultuous, and hopefully these are the breadcrumbs that lead us to resolutions, just so we know what it's going to be going into training camp and going into the regular season. That's the ideal. Whatever's going to happen, let's find out now and just be able to have a clear vision of what this team is going forward. Get over to YouTube, get into the comments, get your podcast here, those needs fulfilled. And until next time, my friends, as we always say, when there's no Doug Norrie, there is no quote short of saying, I miss my friend, and I can't wait to get him back on here talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball. Bro.